go ahead and call on different individuals that are in today's meeting. And if you could just kindly state your name, the organization that you represent, and perhaps just a brief overview of the services that your organization offers or provides, just for helpful context, that would be great. So let's go ahead and start things out with Tony Bruno.
Good afternoon, I believe. This is Tony Bruno, and I'm with Valley Assistance Services, and we work with seniors and families in transportation, non-emergency medical transportation, housing, workforce development, and a variety of other areas.
Great, thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. And then Bonnie.
Hello, everyone. Bonnie Bizzata, and I work with the Primavera Foundation, and I work on issues related to policies. So glad to be with you today.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate that. Could I also go ahead and move forward with asking Christopher McNamara to introduce himself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris McNamara. I'm the Vice President of Rehabilitation Services at Beacon Group, and we're a nonprofit headquartered in Tucson, and we provide services to individuals with disabilities and primarily around employment services and employment readiness.
Great. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're able to be here. Elizabeth Cozy.
Hi, everyone. Liz Cozy. I'm Associate Vice President of Community Development at the United Way of Tucson in Southern Arizona. And my areas are financial wellness, healthy living, and housing stability. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate it. And then Tom McKinney.
Good afternoon, Tom McKinney with Interfaith Community Services. We are a social service agency that focuses on eviction prevention, providing food for all of the community, senior transportation and food, and job placements.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate you being here as well. And then Lisa Florin.
Hi, everyone. Apologies that I had to miss the last meeting, but I'm Lisa Florin, she, her, and I work at United Way with our financial wellness teams and housing stability and homelessness.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you being here as well. Okay, let me see who else. I think Lisa Reams.
Hello, everybody. Lisa Reams. I'm the Vice President in charge of programs for Pima Council on Aging. And we're a nonprofit organization that's the designated area agency on aging to serve and advocate for older adults throughout Pima County that are in the greatest social and economic need.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you being here as well. So thank you, everyone, for those introductions and for investing time in this important process. I do have a couple other folks who just joined, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward with the introductions. I do have one individual that is still trying to work out some IT issues, if you will. So we're going to try to support them. So I'm going to go ahead and ask my IT team if they could reach out to the one individual that's still trying to make their way to the meeting and see where we're at with that. And while we're having the IT team do that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Jessica to introduce herself as well. So good afternoon, Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Winchester, and I am the Director of Vocational Services at Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate you being here as well.
Yes.
Right. I'm just going to double check, make sure I'm not missing anyone. So in terms of people that are currently on this particular meeting. All right, so my IT team is reaching out to one individual that's experiencing some challenges joining the meeting. So while we do that, if everyone's okay with it, we will move forward to the next item on the agenda, which is the in-kind. And then we just might need to circle back briefly for the individual that's trying to join us, just to catch everyone up, so to speak. And then we will move forward with the agenda. So I'm going to thank you in advance for your grace and your patience with this as we try to be flexible. So, all right. So for the second item on the agenda, it is the in-kind form. And so regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. And then PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. And so if you are paid with federal dollars, please let us know now so that we can make sure that we account correctly for what we tabulate as in kind. So if you're paid through federal dollars, whether in part or in entirely, let me go ahead and acknowledge that now. So I see Lisa and Tony. So and Lisa Reams, that is, and Tony. Thank you. And then if there's anyone else that I might be missing, please let me know or send verbally or through the hand prompt on this platform, or you could send me an email. So that'd be great. And then I see Elizabeth Cozy as well. Thank you, Elizabeth. And then Lisa Florin. Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. So I do see that we have one more person, I think, to do introductions. So I'm going to go ahead and ask for that introduction. And then, of course, as a reminder, as we're doing introductions, if you could just, state your name, the organization that you represent, and just a kind of brief overview of the services that your organization provides, that'd be great. So I see Jose Vasquez has joined us. So Jose, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
So hello, my name is Jose Vasquez. I'm the Associate Director for COPD. I work with the deaf and deafblind and hard of hearing communities. We provide services for them. Engagement, support services, counseling, things like that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jose. I appreciate you being here. And just as a quick recap, we have different individuals from around the region. And just for quick catching up purposes, I'll just call on each person. If you could just state the organization that you're from or representing today, that would be helpful, just to make sure Jose is caught up, because we went through the introductions while we're trying to navigate some IT challenges. So with that in mind, Lisa Reams.
Lisa Reams from Pima Council on Aging.
Thank you, Lisa. And Bonnie?
Bonnie Bizzata with Primavera Foundation.
And then Chris McNamara?
Chris McNamara with Beacon Group.
Great. And Elizabeth Cozy?
Elizabeth Cozy, United Way of Tucson and Southern Arizona.
Great, thank you. And then Tom McKinney?
Tom McKinney with Interfaith Community Services.
And then Lisa Reams?
Already got me.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Lisa Florin. I apologize.
Hi, Jose. Lisa Florin, United Way of Tucson in Southern Arizona.
Great. And I think lastly, Jessica Winchester?
Jessica Winchester. Jose, you know me. We work next to each other. Catholic Community Services.
That's right. Thank you. All right. I appreciate everyone doing those quick
And-
introductions.
And Tony
ahead.
Bruno with Valley Assistant Services.
Great. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. Hopefully I didn't forget anyone else, so forgive me if I did. All right. So we just covered the in-kind form.
This is Jose.
Okay. Sorry. Hi, Jose. Sorry.
Sorry. I'm also, I'm from COPD. So the organization name, we also provide hospital services.
Oh, okay. Great.
Sorry, I forgot about that.
That's all right. Thank you. I appreciate that you adding that. That's helpful. Okay, so just a quick reminder, if anyone is paid for federal dollars, we want everyone to acknowledge that now, either verbally or through the raising of hand prompt on the platform, or sending me an email so that we can make sure that we account for our in-kind calculations correctly. Because all the time that's dedicated in meetings are used for matching funds for grants for federal dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I have everyone. I don't see any additional hands up with regard to that. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda. All right. So we have reviewed the funding amounts and discussion tools in previous meetings. And I know that different people that are represented on this particular meeting perhaps are a little bit different than previous meetings. So what I think might be helpful is just to do a very quick overview of the funding amounts. We're not going to review all the service intents. I believe everyone that's on this meeting has reviewed the funding and service amounts in the past. So I'm not entirely concerned about that, but because it's the baseline for our discussion, I think it's still prudent to do so. And then the discussion tool that was communicated last meeting is the one that I want to be able to bring to the table for this meeting. So if either Elizabeth Cozy or Lisa Florin could have that available to share, that'd be great. So I'll allow for either Elizabeth or Lisa to pull that up while we're reviewing the funding amounts and briefly the service intents, if you will.
Yeah, I have it ready.
Okay, great. All right. So if my IT team could go ahead and pull up the funding and service intents slides, we'll go ahead and go through those. So as a reminder for the Department of Child Safety, which is mainly about supportive intervention and guidance counseling, and of course, behavioral therapeutic activities, we're focused on state fiscal year 2026 at the local plan level. And the amount in this particular category, if you will, is $286,031. And then we're just going to move to the next category, which should be the Division of Aging and Adult Services. And again, this is for state fiscal year 2026 at the local plan level. And the services are primarily around home care for elderly adults, personal care, housekeeping, home health and shopper services, clients that are unable to meet all the needs of maintaining a home in a safe and sanitary manner, or shop for their own food, or have insufficient support systems, either family and friends, to assist them. And of course, this covers case management as well as home delivered meals. And the total amount for state fiscal year 2026 at the local plan level, as per the Department of Economic Security, is $779,395. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and move to the next category, which should be the Division of Community Assistance and Development, or DCAD. And so with that, you'll see that there's a variety of services, including supportive intervention guidance counseling, crisis intervention shelter services, case management, legal assistance in a variety of categories, whether it be for domestic violence or for civil legal matters for low-income residents, emergency shelter, and then, of course, housing support services. And when we, again, look at the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, the amount as per Department of Economic Security is $289,330. Right. And then we're going to go ahead and move to the next slide, which should be for the category of Workforce Development Administration, or WDA. And again, the category, or services rather, for this category is employment services. And again, for the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, the amount as per Department of Economic Security is $41,708. And then lastly, we'll look at Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA. And these services are pertinent to interpreter service for deaf adults who need interpreter assistance in accessing needed services. And then, of course, supportive intervention guidance counseling for persons who are hard of hearing persons who have problems in adjusting to their disability at work and in family and interpersonal relationships. And at the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, the amount is $58,163. All right, so I think that covers the different broad service categories. So pertinent to the social services block grant as we review state fiscal year 2026. So at this juncture, we're going to go ahead and leave that kind of available if we need to reference it later, meaning it can be in the backdrop or we could pull it back up through my IT team. But I'd like to move to the next item on the agenda, which is our discussion for recommendations, I believe. So if we could go ahead and move to that item. So yes, this is for funding prioritizations and recommendations. So as a reminder, the aim for this discussion is to serve up just what it says, funding prioritizations and recommendations for regional council to review and either approve or disapprove. These recommendations will be a part of our ongoing public input process. So we will have a public input process to reach out to the greater community in our region. So that will be another part as well. So with that in mind, I wanted to go ahead and ask those from the United Way to go ahead and pull up the discussion tool that was shared last time that we met as a group, as well as what was communicated via email, so that people would have an opportunity to kind of see it firsthand in its spreadsheet form versus kind of the static display that you see right now on the platform. And the font size is a little bit bigger too. So if you have that available to you while you're on this call right now, it might be helpful to pull it up just so that you can see certain things a little bit more easily, but we will do our best to accommodate in terms of magnifying things or perhaps zooming in as appropriate. I'm not entirely certain what our capabilities are when we're navigating such a large spreadsheet, but we'll do our best. How about that? So with that in mind, I'm going to let either Elizabeth Cozy or Lisa Florin from the United Way speak more fully to this discussion tool to put us all on equal footing as we move forward with making those prioritizations and recommendations. So I'm not sure who would like to speak to this. So if it's Elizabeth, I'll let you go ahead and start, or if it's Lisa Florin, either way is fine.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And I apologize because there's something weird happening with my mouse. It's moving very slowly, so that may make it difficult for me to navigate this, but we'll just go with it. But yeah, I think you all discussed this tool last time, and going back 2 meetings, this was very much just kind of meant to be a starting point for thinking about, is there a more kind of methodical process that we can have where we feel like input is being put into these recommendations, and specifically input of local surveys maybe that are already happening, and also ways to align our funding recommendations for this committee with other plans. And so what I had done is just picked three plans that utilize public input and tried to do a little bit of a matrix to see where they overlapped with these priority areas for our SSBG funding. The first one I picked was the Prosperity Initiative, because that's been a really large countywide effort. 750 people provided input into naming those 13 to 16 priorities. There's also a really great effort that the Cooperative Extension does, surveying people and subject matter experts in our county. And so that was a good way to just kind of see what priorities had emerged from their surveying. So I actually used it for like 3 categories that I thought aligned really well with our SSBG areas, specifically health and community well-being, which is one of the areas they survey on, and also economic development. And then the city of Tucson, while it's not countywide, you know, that is a substantial population in our community, and they did a lot of surveying for their people, communities, houses, investment plan. And yeah, had surveyed, I think, 400 or 500 people about what community priorities were. And so all of these, you know, were existing efforts to get input about how money should be spent, and especially public money. So those were the reasons I chose those. But definitely, you know, this was kind of just presented to all of you. Very much was open to if there were other surveys or feedback that should be counted as like an input. I'm open to that. One thing I had been thinking though too, based on what I heard happened at the last meeting and where your discussion went, is maybe, you know, we should also give some points for what our committee thinks. And, you know, maybe that's where our voice as a committee comes in. So maybe there's some kind of, you know, mechanism where even during this meeting, we vote on 3 to 5 priorities, and then they all get an extra vote based on just, you know, the presentations we've had, the fact sheets that we've reviewed, and the discussions. But as it stands right now, so we kind of got points assigned on where the different categories aligned with those surveys and initiatives. And yeah, so you could get 0 to 5 points. And again, somewhat arbitrarily, just to have a starting point, I assigned 15% funding reduction if there was no alignment at all, 12% if they only aligned in 1, 2 if they aligned, or 10% if they aligned in 2. And that was kind of just meant to, those percentages were chosen as, I don't know, just thought they wouldn't be super disruptive to the grants. But I think that's a point that, you know, could be changed, or definitely would love to hear people's perspectives on if those percentages should be higher or lower. And then that amount that was reduced, made the decision to apply 2/3 of it to the highest ranking point getter. So the category that had the most alignment with all that input and public planning. And the remainder of the money split among ones that scored 4 points, so had strong alignment. So at the end of the day, I mean, I don't think this resulted in super substantial shifts, but I thought the benefit was that it was, you know, an approach that did allow some money to be moved around in a way that, you know, has some validation behind it and has some evidence and input from the community. So that's my quick overview of this tool.
Well,
Open to
thank you.
thoughts.
Thank you, Lisa. I think what'd be appropriate is to go ahead and capture the thoughts or questions that people have based on what's been shared just now, and obviously even reflective of what was discussed in previous meetings. So I see Bonnie has her hand up, so I'll call on Bonnie, and then I'll do my best to acknowledge others that might have questions or comments. And I think I saw a couple other hands up, so we'll make sure we try to capture all those. I see Chris and Tom's hands up, and there might have been a couple others. So Bonnie, I'll call on you first because I see your hand up. Unless Elizabeth, did you have something to add that we should capture before it gets started?
The only other thing I would say out loud, and maybe Lisa did articulate this, I might not have heard properly, but the increases and decreases in allocation are based solely on what was already happening. So this was not kind of like a clean slate, here's the bucket of money, and we're, you know, deciding from scratch where, you know, where changes would occur. It either built on or subtracted from what the agency was or what the area was already receiving. So just to clarify that.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you. All right, so let me call on Bonnie, and then I'll call on Tony, then Tom, then Chris.
Well, first, I apologize. My internet went wonky and I got kicked off, so it took me a minute to get back on. But Janine, I did, before we even jump into this conversation, I did want to circle back to some questions that I've raised over several meetings. And I don't know if DES responded to those. But I think particularly the most important one was I was asking for clarification if these SSPG funds are designated only for low-income individuals, and if yes, is there a threshold?
Right, and I did reach out to the Department of Economic Security, and I'm literally checking my inbox right now to see if an answer came through while we've been on this call, and do not see an email from them at this juncture. But I did ask the very question that you're posed, and the way that I characterized the question was much like how you just verbalize it. But I just clarified. I said, is it reasonable to assume that unless it's explicitly stated that it's for low income, because on some of the service intents, it does use that language, that we're to assume that that is not necessarily the qualifier, if you will, or is it, much to your point, Bonnie, like, is it to assume that it's for, that all are considered low income? So that is the question at hand, and I have not yet received a response from Department of Economic Security, but I'm going to leave my inbox up so I can see if it comes in while we're in the midst of these discussions. And I might even just send a reminder email while we're chatting to see if I can get them to perhaps answer while we're discussing
Great.
this. So yeah.
Thank you. Just as a question too, Lisa, I know you've received some of the SSPG funds, right? Do you know whether it's restricted for use for low-income seniors, or is it more general? Or Tom, maybe you know. I'm just, it just factors in a little bit to my particular thinking about distribution.
United Way does not receive these funds.
But Lisa Reams does. I believe she told us in the previous meeting. Yeah, sorry. I meant it for Lisa.
Yeah, the funds that come in for aging and adult services all flow through Pima Council on Aging. Some of them we keep for case management, and most of them are contracted out to other folks in the community. So we head up a community services system that provides services. And I'm not sure if it's an SSBG requirement or just part of our larger Older Americans Act requirement that all of our funds go to people that are in the greatest social and economic need. So I know that 80% of them go to people under 150% of federal poverty level and almost 100% under 200% of federal poverty level. But I can't answer your question directly because I'm not sure if that's Older Americans Act or SSBG that's just requiring that.
That's really helpful, Lisa. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Right. I think I promised, thank you, Bonnie, for being good about sharing with the group the question that you posed and reminding me to address whether or not we received an answer just yet. So I'm literally going to hit send here in just a second to see if I can get them to perhaps at least give us some guidance. We'll see how that goes. But I think I promised Tony to be able to speak next. So I'm going to go ahead and move with Tony.
Yeah, Janine, you may have answered this already, and it does go back to DES, because one of the questions that when we left one of our meetings was to see how the money was spread around the county. And I know that can be somewhat, I'm going to say, ambiguous, because if it goes to an agency who spreads money out further, we may not know where that money goes. But when I hear where the surveys went, and with the city of Tucson on that is somebody in the rural areas, I think that sort of weights the responses a little bit. And so I was just curious where else the money ends up within Pima County.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna write that down and and see how I can get an answer to that. I'm not convinced that I'm the best person to speak to that particular question. So I hate to give the group, advice or guidance that's lacking. So I don't know if anyone else that's on the meeting today has a perspective on that, but I did try to write down a little bit of what you had just expressed, and we'll see what we can find out. Let's see. I think I promised Tom McKinney next.
Lisa, this is great. Lisa and Liz, whoever did all this work, it's really nice to see it all on one spreadsheet and the way that you picked it. I'm just wondering, did you leave out any community surveys? I know you can't have like 10 or 20, but did you leave anything out that you're like, oh, I wish we could have squeezed this in, or?
This is an area where, I think it would have been interesting to hear from the committee, and if we did this again, like if there are surveys you all think should be included. But I know that, there was one, I think PSCOA helps with it, and it's a pretty large survey about older adults. There's also the health department does some wide surveys. But the reason I decided to not include both of those is because I did think, they were focused on more specific issues or more specific populations, whereas these that I ended up including, they seemed to have just be right sized for the different areas covered with the SSBG funding, and also have like a wide population. But if there are other ones that you all think should have been included, I'm definitely all ears.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you asking those kind of questions. And then Chris McNamara.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think, first of all, this is great to have it all laid out in a spreadsheet format like this, and it's very helpful to see that. I would, though, question a little bit of the weighing of the point values, just because we do see a lot of overlap in the surveys, and it's no question that housing is an issue in Tucson. And I think that, just because that came up for, in multiple different surveys, I don't think that that's surprising. And I don't know that it means that it should weigh more in the sense because it just showed up more in a different survey. That would be my only feedback on that. Because there does seem to be some duplication even across some of the co-op, top 20 top 20 and top 10 lists. Access to affordable, healthy food, obviously very important. But again, is it worth, the same weight that it's getting compared to others, or housing, for example, gets 3 or 4 points in some areas. Again, just because it shows up in the survey, but I like it. It's very helpful to see that there. So thank you. But that's my feedback.
Sorry, I'm talking into mute. Thank you, Chris. I saw Elizabeth's hand up, so I wanted to make sure I called on Elizabeth. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I just was going to add that there's another survey out there, the Gallup survey that Local First Arizona partnered on. And although it's a bit more outdated, it was done as a 10-year kind of plan, if you will. However, we looked at that in the process of writing another grant, and it aligns very, very closely with the cooperative extension results. And the only reason I bring it up is because Tony asked about rural areas. That Gallup survey is priority weighted for rural and underserved communities. So respondents from those areas and certain demographic groups got kind of like a higher weighting because of the known inequities historically. So just kind of throwing that out there as well.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay, I'm just taking a quick look to see if I see any other hands up with questions or comments, concerns as we continue to move forward with the discussion and obviously leading towards making some recommendations and prioritization. So I think I still see a hand up. Let me see. Oh, it's Chris. Sorry about that, Chris. Go ahead.
No, yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, I pulled up this report, SSBG annual report from the Administration of Children and Families. And the question earlier was asked about who it, the eligibility and where the money goes. And just to share with the group, as I know that Janine, you're waiting for an email response, but the states, I'm reading from this report, the states have great discretion in the specific services they provide with the social services block grants. And then it goes on, I'm on page 8. It says that states, expenditures from a state's annual appropriation and funds transferred from the state's TANF block grant. TANF transfer funds are intended for programs and services and families whose income is less than 200% of the federal income poverty guideline. But that is just, it sounds like that's just for the, whatever part is TANF transfer funds. So I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody else on the call. I don't know that it does to me, but I thought I'd share it.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you researching that and sharing those elements with the group. And like you had shared, if anyone else knows more about that particular area, feel free to comment because it could be helpful for today's discussion. I see Elizabeth's hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and call on Elizabeth.
I'm really reluctant to wade in here because I don't have a lot of information, but I know that our TANF dollars are not applied the way other states do. So Chris, I don't know if that was specific to Arizona or if that was no. Okay, Lisa, do you remember kind of?
This was the national, like a national report.
Okay, yeah, we've got weird TANF rules in Arizona, but I can't really speak more specifically than that. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't either. I'm sure we could find our TANF rules. But I think the long and the short of it is that very little of it goes towards direct assistance. That's kind of the main differentiation between us and most other states. I think we are maybe the lowest in terms of giving individuals and families that assistance directly. We also, I think, have the most requirements for accessing it and the shortest amount of time that you're allowed to use it. So.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Lisa. Anyone else? Let me see if I missed any hands going up with questions or comments, concerns. Just want to make sure I'm fair to everyone. Okay,
I'm sorry. I can't. I think because I'm sharing my screen, I can't put my hand up. My hand is up.
Oh, go ahead, Lisa. That's an interesting quirk though, because your screen's up, you don't have that ability.
I might also just not be using Zoom correctly. But yeah, I mean, I think my outstanding questions for everybody too would be if we would want to add some kind of committee vote as like an input into this, and also just if there's any discussion about the percentage amounts and like what would be recommended for changes. I appreciate the input about my first question though, which is like other plans. I definitely took some notes for that.
And I think the other piece that I think Chris might have commented on, and I see Tom's hand up, so I'll reach out to Tom in just a moment, but was about just giving pause around perhaps where certain topics might appear in multiple surveys and how it might impact, the results or the points that are awarded. I think that's to some extent what I think Chris had shared. Chris, if I'm paraphrasing poorly, you correct me. So I'll let Chris do that.
You got it. That's what I was getting.
Okay. And then, so I don't know if that's something we need to discuss as a group in terms of comfort level around how the discussion tool is currently, mapped out. But I promised Tom that I would call on him, so I'm going to call on Tom.
Yeah, I think just to answer Lisa's question or her two questions, I'm not a fan of the committee having a vote and doing that. I don't think it's as objective as this form is. So I kind of like basing it on the information that we have in front of us and not maybe our personal biases. I think the second one, there's always a debate about the amount of money. So that might be a discussion, but I'm not a huge fan of adding a point places where, you know, I might feel it's better or not, but that's just my personal preference.
Thank you, Tom. I would just like to get people's feedback on Tom's comment about, it sounded like an importance of trying to be as objective as possible, and to what extent allowing for points to be associated with votes could steer us away from that objectivity, if I'm paraphrasing Tom correctly. Just get some thoughts on that. And I do see Lisa Reams's hand up, so I want to make sure I call on Lisa. But so let me call on Lisa and capture her thoughts or questions. But I would like to circle back to comments or feedback on Tom's view that he had shared. So go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I can segue that nicely because my feedback is on Tom's view. Yes, I agree completely that, you know, we're all here as representatives of different populations and different services within this community, and all of them are important and all of them need money. And I think the importance of us being here is to make sure that proper data and education around the needs and services and what we're seeing with those populations is brought to the table. And I like the fact that we're all trying to agree on a process together to do that. But I don't want it to devolve, or I hope it doesn't devolve into each of us trying to make sure that we, you know, it could easily devolve into each of us trying to make sure we get more for the population we're here representing. And it's hard for it not to do that when you're here representing a population. But I just wanted to throw that out, that I agree that as much as we could make that as objective and not subjective, I would also appreciate that.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think that's an important reminder for the group in terms of the line that we all have to walk in terms of our responsibilities that were outlined in previous meetings, but also in writing an email about how we navigate this particular process. So I think Tom's points are commensurate with those guidelines. So I think that's an important reminder and feedback. But if anyone holds a different opinion, of course, that's part of the process, right? For people to share thoughts, concerns, and opinions on different things. So if anyone has any other comments on the tool as it's been shared so far, or any of just the comments and questions, concerns that members have expressed thus far, I'm going to go ahead and call on people if their hands are up using the platform. I see Elizabeth's hand up. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I just want to say out loud that it is a conundrum, because I feel that we're all here to weigh in, to make some recommendations to move this forward. So in that capacity, we are using our expertise and just our knowledge about the landscape of services to make those recommendations. I think what voting or putting some sort of point value does, if you know you've done a grant review process or something, is it helps kind of the outliers come together, particularly if the point value needs to be within a certain range. You know, so might be a way to develop consensus. And I'm not saying that this is what we should do. I'm just offering some other pieces about how that might work.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lisa. All right, Elizabeth, I think that's a good perspective for consideration. So thank you for sharing that. Any other perspectives or thoughts around how we, find the balance, I guess is one way to put it on this. Any additional thoughts about what Tom had shared, of course, with as well as Elizabeth's input? Any other comments or thoughts? Questions? All right. So with that being said, I think perhaps one place to start might be to see where we sit with what is illustrated in the rubric. So I shouldn't call it a rubric, the discussion tool so far, just to make sure that everyone that's in this meeting right now is clear as to whether or not this is merely an example of how the tool can be used, or if this example, if you will, that's illustrated here is what we as a group are weighing in on in terms of reaching some kind of consensus, because where we sit with that will drive next steps. And then perhaps to Elizabeth's point, if we want to use votes in some way, shape, or form to help us kind of narrow in and reach that consensus, we can have that conversation at that time. But I think the first thing to tackle, so to speak, is this merely an example, or is this what the group is trying to decide whether or not they agree or disagree, or need to find a little bit more of a middle ground on. So I'm going to let Elizabeth or Lisa share what their thoughts was, and maybe it was said earlier and I just missed it, but just for the sake of clarity and maybe reinforcing it, is what is on the screen merely an example of how the tool could be used, or is it this is kind of after putting our expertise into this and knowing what we know about the surveys, et cetera, and how the tool was designed, this is perhaps a starting point for discussion, and is this something the group would want to move forward with?
Yeah, I mean, I think based on the conversation that I've heard, all of the things that are put into this tool right now are real thing, are actual like input, from the community and actual current plans. And so, yeah, potentially this could be a starting recommendation of how we might recommend to DES that our community's funding does get allocated. But we could also talk about changing some of the percentages, or just, using it as one idea that informs completely different set of final recommendations.
Okay. All right, Tom, I see your hand is up, so I'll.
Yeah, I think we should use the tool. I mean, I think to make a recommendation, to be able to say we didn't do as in the past, or we didn't just do the same thing, that we actually are trying to put some metrics that we measure against and how money is given. I think whether it's all the right information or I think it's a great starting point for not only this initiative, but maybe other ones to work off of this tool. So I'd hate to see us go back and say, well, we're just, this was a great example, but we're going to go back and just allocate the way that we used to allocate. And again, we don't get the final say, but I think we've put so much work into it that, whether the percentages are right or wrong, I think that we could probably discuss. But I actually like the work that we've done here and the basis of saying this is why we came up with this recommendation.
Thank you, Tom. So let's just get people's general feedback. Is everyone, or is the vast majority of those in the meeting today comfortable with moving forward with using this discussion tool to try to reach consensus around recommendations and prioritizations? Knowing that we don't have final say, right? There's still has to go to regional council, et cetera. There's still other parts of the public input process, but is everyone comfortable with using this tool? I think that's kind of, I think, the question at hand.
So this is Chris. Oh.
Hi, Chris, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, I think the tool is great. I made a comment earlier on what I, thought, I gave some feedback earlier on my perspective on how we do some of the weighing. And I know it's tough not to advocate, for populations that we all care about. And I know folks could all make those arguments, but, for example, a pretty significant cut, right? 15%, say, for behavioral therapeutic activities. So, kids with disabilities. I mean, to me, yeah, I mean, how do you pick? Everything we have here is important. But I mean, it's hard not to have kind of a professional, perspective on a topic that, maybe it didn't show up in those, cooperative extension, community health and well-being, very valuable surveys, but I don't know that, and I forgive me, I didn't have a chance to review the surveys, but was that something that was even presented or included in those surveys, right? And I can look through it. I have, like I said, I haven't had a chance. So yeah, that's just some more feedback from my perspective. I don't know if anyone else
Yeah. And
has
yeah,
a similar view.
I can't speak to it right now, but I want to say I actually think it might have been an option on the surveys that so there might have been input collected on it and it didn't reach the top, but I can't say that definitively. So
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And then in those cases, yeah, then I suppose maybe I would even, professionally want to be able to suggest a point in there, notwithstanding, my professional interest in that particular topic. Just adding to the dialogue.
Thank you, Chris. And I think that's important feedback. Bonnie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think Chris has made some good points. I think last time, raised a question about one particular element that seemed to me a little bit overly weighted and had to do with the way things showed up on the surveys. So, but I think it's an excellent tool. I think we could tweak it for next year. I think these are the kind of comments, Janine, if you don't mind recording them now. So when we start next year, we might, pick different surveys or, consider new surveys or something like that. And I appreciate that, sometimes the way surveys are constructed, they're leaving out critical areas. I think all that could be considered for next time. But I think for now, this is a pretty strong, defensible matrix for us to use. And this is our last chance to do it. And I think we ought to get points in heaven or someplace for probably being the hardest working committee in the state of Arizona, trying to really dig into this important work. So that would be my feeling, is like, I think these are really critical comments that we should reflect on when we start next year. But given our time frame, and Janine, last time you pointed out that we really do have a deadline here, that and I may have to leave this meeting a little bit early today. So I think we ought to move on to figure out if there's any tweaking we want to do in percentages or something else, in order to finalize our decision.
Okay. Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate that. I do see Lisa Floren's hand up. I'm going to get to Lisa. But on Bonnie's note, I think using a lot of the feedback from going through this process, I'll ask everyone to kind of serve that up after the fact, so that we can use our wisdom from this and insights and questions for perhaps next year. And perhaps we could have a laundry list of things we want to make sure we include, questions for DES, so that we get those taken care of well in advance and allow DES to have sufficient time to give us the answers we'd like. On that, I did get an answer from Department of Economic Security. So let me go ahead and share that. And then I promise I will call on Elizabeth and Chris, and forgive me if that's not in the appropriate order. So, so the first thing is that they're continuing to work on my questions, but they did serve this up immediately because I shared with them that the committee was in session. So it says the Social Services Block Grant, SSBG, is a flexible funding source that allows states and territories to tailor service programming to their population's needs. Through the SSBG, or Social Services Block Grant, states provide essential social services that help achieve a myriad of goals to reduce dependency and promote self-sufficiency, protect children and adults from neglect, abuse, and exploitation, and help individuals who are unable to take care of themselves to stay in their homes or to find the best institutional arrangements. Target population, households with a low income. That's all the email says, other than the hello and the best regards at the end. So it is brief, and it does state that they'll continue to work on my questions, but wanted to send this part at least immediately since the meeting was in session. So that is what I know so far, and that's all I can share at this juncture. But I will keep checking the inbox to see if more stuff or information gets provided. All right, so I'll call on Chris and I'll call on Elizabeth. Sorry if I said I was going to do it the other way earlier. I forgot which word I said. And then I know Lisa's hand's up too. So go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I looked real quick, and I do see that resources for children and youth with disabilities is included in, ranked as extremely or very important. Or maybe it's not in the top 10 or 20. Oh, all right. Well, I kind of answered my question there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. And then Lisa, I know your hand's up, and it's probably been up, and it's probably really tired at this juncture. So I'll call on you, and then Frost will get to Elizabeth. So go ahead, Lisa.
I was actually just gonna say what Chris already found, and yeah, just let you know that that was asked about. I mean, I think in the future too, you know, we could have more conversations about if there are other categories that capture that, you know, we weren't kind of counting, or if there's, you know, some other survey that we would want to send out as a committee that actually captures our like categories to get some more specific input about the SSBG categories. So I think those are really, your comments are very well taken, and we should incorporate those if we move this forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would just add, and sometimes, right, like I think, unfortunately, like folks with disabilities are often overlooked too, in general, and this population doesn't rise to the top of folks' minds when it comes to surveys either. Unfortunately, right, especially, you know, children, right, with disabilities. There's not a, you know, we all care about that, but you know, there needs to be more advocacy and visibility around that as well. So I can see it not rising to the top. But thank you, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And then I'm going to call on Elizabeth, and then just to help move the needle a little bit, I know Bonnie expressed that she might have to leave early, but also I know there's lots of people on this call that have hard stops at 2:00, meaning they have to end the meeting at 2. So I want to be respectful for everyone's time and allow for sufficient time for us to lead towards making recommendations and prioritizations. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
The only thing I'm just sensitive to right now, and I'm sure Anne or Madison would have told us, but we haven't heard anything from Jose. So I just want to invite his contributions if he has any.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. Jose, do you feel like you're on the spot right now? But Jose, we just want to make sure that if there's any questions or comments that you have, because and maybe I just missed your hand, so I apologize. But we've had you know, a lot of different people asking questions, and I'm not always great at capturing when people's hands are up. So I just want to make sure I didn't miss you or Jessica or anyone else on the call. So.
No, I've really just been paying attention to everything about this. This is kind of the first time that I've seen this spreadsheet with all the information on it. So I was looking under the classification for interpreters. You know, we have our own program interpreters through SSBG, but you know, so we have our program here, but I was wondering if this would still apply for interpreter finances, if this would go towards funding, our interpreter department.
Jose, this is Jessica. And I wanted just to chime in. I know what you're talking about, and COPD and CCS does, we did have received the SSBG funds for interpreting services. And that is what we're talking about here, is, whether, being more neutral on the area, the actual needs of the area for interpreting services for the deaf and hard of hearing, and advising that, that should increase based off of this information, that should increase. I'm actually a little bit surprised, I have to say, that the interpreting is the part that's increasing and not the counseling and those services. I would say that based off of our knowledge, and maybe Jose can chime in here, would be something that I see the community as needing more of, rather than the Now, interpreting obviously is accessibility, and I think that it's highly needed, but just based off of experience with our community and the growing needs for behavioral health and counseling services, it's a little bit shocking that that there isn't more in that pot, in that same RSA category, than there is, or there's not a growth there, I guess I should say, for revenue. But that's the only thing I see here. It's not that I disagree at all, but I think that these things are all needed. But maybe Jose, I don't know, Jose, do you feel the same way? I'm just kind of shocked that that's the one that out of the deaf and hard of hearing categories.
Right. I do agree with Jessica. We do still provide counseling.
Correct.
Yeah, and I do think that it's very important for us to keep up the program with the Tucson community, related to health and mental health, behavioral health. Interpreting is just one of the programs that we have. So
Sure.
It is really important that the funding continues for us for that.
Mm-hmm. I would say, especially if you talk, this is Jessica, especially if you talk about the rural communities and people who are have disabilities, or individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, that is really lacking. You can talk all day about Tucson needing this, but the reality is our rural communities in Pima County are receiving even less of these services, and the funding is just not there. So, and think about how much of a need it is for someone to seek counseling, who doesn't actually know that it can be done, or doesn't receive that communication as fast as everybody else. Because that's just, like I said, the reality of people who have disabilities or have or are deaf or hard of hearing. They don't get that communication. Anyways, that's my comment. That's what I do. Like I say, I agree with everybody. I like the spreadsheet, but and then just to tag off of Chris too, I am really shocked that we don't have more towards people with disabilities in that underserved population. I do know that P-CHIP in Tucson generally does have a higher percentage, and maybe not the top, like the spreadsheet says, and this could be my misinformation of where this stands, but for services with deaf and hard of hearing, and individuals for employment and counseling, and client services for people with disabilities. But it probably is just maybe not measured so much as a top priority once again, and just a little bit, it's just a little bit shocking that that's not there. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. And yeah.
I'm just going to jump into, just because to offer some context about the spreadsheet, how I put it together. It is very subjective though too, at the end of the day, especially for this first go around. So I think if we use this in the future, maybe some of our meeting time would be used to kind of be able as a group to say if we think this category is showing up in this plan in certain ways, because I did take some liberties just in terms of doing it kind of by myself, of saying, oh, this survey question maps onto this specific category. And it definitely was probably not perfect for this year. So next year, it would be great if we could maybe do that more as a group.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jose, for your comments and insights. And Lisa, thanks for providing some additional context and opportunities for, you know, moving forward in future years and discussions. So if we could ask either Lisa or Elizabeth to move the spreadsheet. Maybe it's appearing different on my screen than it is on yours, so forgive me, but from where I am viewing the screen anyway, I only can see the top like 1.5 rows of the green shaded areas. I can't really see there. Yeah. So I don't know if that was the same for everybody else, but I believe that these are the areas that, at least as a starting point, the group is going to be weighing in on as to whether or not there's some consensus around leaving these as the recommendations or making any potential changes. So if that's helpful, I just want to make sure that everyone can.
Yeah, and I hid the rows that have no changes. So
Okay.
if
Yeah.
this is helpful, though, these are all the ones that would potentially have changes.
Okay. So if Lisa, if you don't mind, if you could just talk through the
Janine,
spreadsheet as it. Go ahead.
you have several hands up, so just before we
sorry.
move on, I feel like maybe people have things they want to address.
Okay. Thank you. Let me
And while you get sorted, I will just make one last comment and then I'll stop talking. And I'm sorry, I
see
didn't mean
4
to
hands
for
up.
us
No, you're
to
good.
go into a sort of like a program or agency specific conversation. I know that's not why we're here. I just wanted to make sure everybody felt like they had the opportunity to participate. And I do know that Lisa's thinking around services for deaf and hard of hearing absolutely have to do with accessibility. So I hear Jessica and Jose saying, ooh, it's like shocking that it's not around some of the other direct services, but the thinking is you can't access any of the services if you don't have a way to communicate about them. So that's all.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I do see Bonnie's hand up. I see Lisa Reams, and then I think I see Chris's hand up, or maybe not. I thought I saw Chris's hand up, but I know I see Bonnie and Lisa. So I'm going to call on Lisa Reams, and then I'll call on Bonnie.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit of context briefly on the discussion, our questions that were just raised about serving people with disabilities. I had mentioned this in, I think, the first meeting that we had, which seems like forever ago now, and I know not everybody was at that table. But the money that comes through SSBG, that goes through the Division of Aging and Adult Services, that comes to Pima Council on Aging and then gets distributed to a number of our partners, is the only funding source that comes to Pima Council on Aging that we can use for older adults under the age of 60, or excuse me, adults under the age of 60 with disabilities, where all of our other funding is only older adults over the age of 60. So it actually allows us to provide home delivered meals, case management, and in-home services support for older adults with disabilities as well. I just wanted to throw that out there. So I don't know if it makes a difference in how you're viewing the people with disabilities who may be able to be served by this funding. That's.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Lisa. And then Bonnie, I know you had your hand up as well.
I do. I thank you. You know, as people on the call know, I've been advocating for rethinking increased allocation around these housing categories. And I think it's important to remember that in both the homelessness population and the people who are being evicted, that we are very likely to see elderly people. We're very likely to see people with disabilities. Just some statistics are that 53% of chronically homeless individuals suffer from a traumatic brain injury, which is 5 times the rate for the general population. Hang on, I had some other stats here to share. Sorry. 67% of chronically homeless individuals are abused as children. A significant percentage of homeless people are increasingly senior citizens. So I think, you know, part of what these categories do is pull out different subpopulations. But I think when you're looking at housing, we have to remember that that is a real cross section of our community. And of course, you know, people who are more vulnerable because of age, because of disabilities, because of, you know, being in the foster care system, because of being abused as children, are more likely than to show up as being at risk for eviction or experiencing homelessness. So I think, I just think that's an important context for this conversation.
Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate that. I'm just looking real quick to see if I see any other hands up. And I appreciate Elizabeth reminding me that I missed some hands up. So thank you, Elizabeth. What I think might be helpful, just real briefly, just because everyone has like kind of their own learning style and ability to like process and need to process information in different ways. When we look at the section that's in green, which would be like rows 2 through 5, and then if you're looking at like the initial proposal, the proposed change, and then the proposed funding difference, and then of course it lists proposed new funding amounts, and then I don't know what color, I'll characterize that. I'm going to call it peach. Maybe someone has a better coral. I don't know. Someone has a better name for the color below that. Where it looks like that's where the monies would draw from, so to speak, in terms of relative broad service category, to make those changes. I just want to make sure everybody's understanding what is on the screen so that everyone's on equal footing as people weigh in as to what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with, and we try to make these recommendations. So if you could just give a quick overview of that, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, I think that would be helpful. I'll let Lisa or Elizabeth navigate that however they see fit. Just want to make sure everybody's understanding what's represented in those columns in terms of how the changes are reflected.
Oh, you want someone to talk it through?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Please. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, so if there was only one category that seemed to hit 0 of the points, so proposed a 15% funding decrease there, which comes out to about $10,000 less for that behavioral therapeutic activities one. And then if they only hit 1, proposed 12% drop, which was about $4,000 or $5,000 for the emergency shelter, employment services, and the counseling that was mentioned earlier. And then for 2 points, that was guidance counseling with the Department of Child Safety, and that was a 10%. Oh, and also, that was the emergency shelter one. Sorry, my bad. But those were 10% reductions, so about $3,400 and $5,300. And then altogether, that amount was $28,000 that then was split among the categories that had 4 or 5 points. And so put 2/3 of all of that $28,000 towards the one project that had points in every category, which was case management, specifically focused on domestic violence situations. So that increased that funding area by $18,000. And then the 3 categories that got 4 points then split the difference of the leftover. So that was just about $3,000 each increase for them.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page in their level of understanding of how those amounts came to pass in this discussion tool, and then allow for any questions that people might have based on that, and then we could continue with the discussion. So just real quick, if there's any questions. I don't see any hands up. I'm trying to be really good to make sure I don't miss anyone. Elizabeth, you call me on it if I'm missing somebody. So all right, so if there's no questions about that, I guess the question at hand is, based on what we're seeing in this discussion tool in terms of the areas in green where it says the initial proposal, then the proposed change, and then the proposed funding difference, and then the proposed new funding amount. What is the thoughts there? Are we in consensus around these changes? Is there some opinions that need to be shared and given consideration around for any potential changes? What are people thinking at this point? Let's see if I see any hands up here. I see Chris's. Is it Chris's hand that's up? No, Bonnie.
Yep. Thanks. Oh,
Both are up. Both are up. Sorry. Okay, I'll call on Chris, and then I'll call on Bonnie.
thank you. So, yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is a great process. I would say, I think we all agree that we'll continue to work on this in the future and continue to enhance such a tool. And I agree with many of the comments around, the quality of the work that the group has been doing. I think, if maybe the cuts, and maybe we're splitting hairs or I'm splitting hairs, but maybe, is there any discussion on the percentages? For example, I think right now we're at $28,000 and, with the suggested changes. I just did a little update and it just, and that works out to about 1.9%, I think, of the overall. My math could be off, but so if we, let's say, went with 3, 6, 6, and 9% cuts, just as a change, that would be 13,400. So about a 1% change. And again, that would at least give us some steps towards making these types of strategic decisions and have the framework, and then maybe be, more aggressive in the future with more input, more data. Anyway, that's a suggestion putting on the table.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Any thoughts around Chris's suggestion? I know I said I'd call on Bonnie. So before I get those thoughts on Chris's suggestion, let me call on Bonnie.
Somewhat similarly, two things. I think so much work went into this, but the adjustments are pretty minor. So I do agree, or I'm interested in seeing a higher percentage change in those categories. But my second point is I can live with this as our recommendations for this year. And then I think we can start next year with, way ahead of where we started this year, with more of an eye to how to build this out in a way that, gets us to the finish line. So I would agree that I think, perhaps increasing the change, or increasing the changes would make sense, because these are some pretty small funding differences of, some are just over 3,000 in the top category. So yeah, that's my thinking.
Well, and interestingly, you said increase it, but it sounded like Chris was saying actually do smaller changes.
Yeah, that was my suggestion, is the smaller changes to 3, 6, 6, and 9. But
oh, I see.
For the cut part,
yeah.
right? For the percentages of decrease, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, well, then I am arguing something different than Chris.
And we appreciate both perspectives. So, I mean, that's the beauty of having a subcommittee, is you get to hear different perspectives and allow that to contribute to discussion. So thank you both for that. Any other comments or food for thought, so to speak? I see Jessica Winchester's hand is up, and then I'm gonna see if anyone else is. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of ditto Chris on the maybe a gradual increase. I know it doesn't seem like a high percentage, but for some of the folks, I think, or some of the services that are receiving smaller amounts, like a 12% or a 10% decrease is like, a third of maybe a third of their case management or a third of their counseling services for the year in that funding source. That would be, limiting a lot of folks from the community to be able to receive those services. And in particularly like the workforce and rehabilitation services for the deaf and hard of hearing, those are provided in their native language. So that it is accessible and so that we do not have to use like the interpreting. So again, just a thought, but I really feel like maybe a gradual increase up into how much is coming out rather than taking it all out right now. I don't know. That's just my thought, but I do kind of agree with Chris. I think there needs to be a build up towards the amounts that are coming out of the places who are seeing the decrease. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Let me see if I see any other hands up. Don't see any other hands up. Okay. All right. So with the comments and perhaps suggestions. Oh, I see Elizabeth. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
You were probably just going there, but I feel like now we're starting to have some people weigh in like, okay, maybe this is a little bit drastic. And so I'm just going to propose, what if we change the percentage, the proposed change for the folks that are having a decrease to be more like 10, 8, 8, and 6 or something. So just getting that conversation going, which will release a little bit more to be added to the folks that are gaining. Or somebody suggest something else, because it seems like that's the direction we're going.
And I think Jessica's points were, are somewhat rooted in acknowledging that, 10% of a small number is different than 10% of a bigger number in terms of how it can, hit harder, so to speak. But then the other side of it is like some of the reasons why funding amounts are as large as they are is relative to the cost of providing those services. So, so there's, thoughts around that as well. But yeah, so I think we should potentially open up some discussion around what you had just shared, Elizabeth, in terms of, does the group want to just explore what it might look like? We can use the tool, in real time and say, like, what happened if we used a different percentage or methodology there, and how it would change the different funding amounts. Is that something the group would like to explore? Gonna see if I see any hands up. How about we just do a show of hands, so to speak, for those that are comfortable with just seeing what it would look like if we made some changes to the percentages? Is that fair? People just use the platform to put a hand up saying they're comfortable with at least just looking at it, what it looks like if we made changes to the percentages.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing because I don't want to do that in front of everybody and have everyone watching my mistakes. So I'll be right back.
That's fine. Yeah. You're good. So I guess, I just don't want to put Elisa or Elizabeth through the exercise of, changing everything if that's something the group doesn't even want to really explore. So, but I am trying to allow for that to be a discussion point. Is that something the group would like to see, given the feedback that's been recently expressed by different people? So in either direction, right? Because Bonnie had a different perspective than perhaps, Chris or or Jessica. So I want to be fair to both perspectives, but is there value in taking a look at different methodologies, so to speak, like Elizabeth had shared? I see Tom's hand up.
So I'm probably, I like Bonnie's aggressiveness. I'm probably not ready to go to that level. I like what's proposed. I would look at the, if you want to decrease it, I wouldn't stop it, but I think this is a really good start. And we can have this debate, all day about percentages and allocations and all of that. So, and I don't know that we're right or wrong. So, I think I think we've made huge strides. I think the percentages are okay. Going down, I mean, how far do you want to go down, and how far do you really, are we making that impact and that change? So that's just my thought. I'm not opposed to looking at it, Janine. I'm actually really good with what's presented.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. So in that spirit, perhaps the other question in hand is the vast majority of the folks on the meeting today in a similar posture as Tom, saying, for today, we're comfortable with where the discussions pool sits, and perhaps now is not the time to spend additional minutes on manipulating the numbers to see. Perhaps that's better served for next year when we have some of the other elements that we already characterized in place, right? More input from DES, more input about surveys, et cetera, all the other things that have already been discussed. Is that where the group is sitting, more in terms of what Tom had just shared?
Janine, can we have people just raise their hands?
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for, is people would just raise their hand, and if the vast majority of people are seated, so to speak, from an opinion perspective as to where Tom is, then we'll go with that. I'm just gonna look at my other screen here. It's easier to see the number of hands that are up. I can see them all. Tom, I'm assuming your hand's up. Yeah, okay. I don't have a couple people's hands up, and that's okay. I'm not trying to sway. I just want to make sure that if you wanted to put your hand up, but you just haven't had time, that I allow for that time. Okay, so trying to count the total number of people that are on the call. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people actively participating in this meeting, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 raised hands. So I believe we have 9 participants and 6 raised hands, saying that they're comfortable with moving forward with the discussion tool as it sits right now in terms of our recommendations. Is that accurate? Did I miss anyone? Okay. So again, this committee is just serving up recommendations to regional council. Regional council can approve or not approve. And of course, we still have our public input process, and all of those comments that come in from the general public are also served up to regional council as part of that process. So we just needed to reach some kind of consensus, and so usually the way that we do it is either we go by, majority, which in this instance, it looks like the vast majority have voted for just going with what the decision tool says. But that's, mainly based on vote, right? But consensus also can be defined as, if you can live with it. Doesn't mean necessarily agree, but can you live with it? And so that's the kind of the question at hand before we, as a group, say, like, is this what we're moving forward with as our recommendations, given that 6 of the 9 have said they're comfortable with using this. I just want to see if there's any other thoughts that need to be communicated before we call it, so to speak, and say that these are the recommendations. So I see Bonnie's hand is up. Bonnie?
No, I'm sorry. I just
Okay.
didn't look down.
All right.
I am gonna have to step off in about 5 minutes, so
Okay. All
I'm
right.
getting distracted.
All right. So I want to make sure that if there's any other closing comments from anyone else on the meeting right now, because it looks like right now these are the recommendations that we're going to go with. What's on the discussion tool? Is that accurate? Is that what the group has decided as our effort to reach consensus?
Janine, can I just add that on behalf of the whole group, I think I want to give a huge shout out to Liz and Lisa at the United Way for the work they put into this, because without this tool that you created, we wouldn't be here right now. And it's not just that you created something, but the wisdom and time and intentionality and thoughtfulness that you put into it has really made all the difference in where we've gotten. So I just wanted to honor that.
Thank you for that, Lisa, and it's really Lisa Florin.
Yeah, I do appreciate the work that was put into it. I do think it was a very helpful tool, so I appreciate that. And I think when we do this next year, we'll have a really good starting place and other opportunities to move this process in a very objective manner. I do want to say that as we serve up our recommendations, the comments or perspectives that might be helpful for regional council to take into consideration is something we can add in addition to what is listed in the discussion tool. So for those that did not raise their hand for what is presented on the discussion tool, I would welcome that feedback so that I can include it in the recommendations as something for regional council to consider. So if there's value in that, feel free to send that to me and or state it now, and we'll try to do our best to capture it because it is recorded. So however you see fit, but I think it's appropriate for us to be able to at least capture that and serve it up with the recommendations. Is everyone comfortable with that?
Janine, do you communicate with us when some of these public input opportunities will happen so that we can share that out?
Yeah, so we'll be drafting up our notice for public input, and then it'll have the exact dates for when that'll be out there. So I could definitely share with the group, and of course it gets posted publicly. So so those dates will be there. But yeah, I could definitely do that. Right. Any questions or comments before we close out the meeting, since it looks like we have recommendations, and I'll just look for any other comments that would need to be considered by regional council as we move forward with those recommendations from those that are in the committee. All right, so if this is the recommendation that we're going to go with, I'm understanding it to be that we're going to move forward with the recommendations that are in the discussion tool. And just for a quick recap, if we could pull that tool back up and just show those amounts one more time, just so that people can see it. And then I will just need that saved and sent to me in a form that cannot be modified, changed, or edited in any way, so that I can serve that up appropriately to regional council. And then, of course, I'd also like to share it with the group. So
I don't know what happened to the other rows.
yeah, I know you
there they
hit
are.
them. So yeah. But yeah, just for clarity, if I can have it, in its entirety, like how it shows everything, but then also just to keep it really concise so that the recommendations are very clear. So
Yes, I'll pass that along.
okay. All right. Thank you so much. All right. I appreciate everyone's time. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide or item on the agenda. So if I could have my IT team pull that up. Or I guess maybe Lisa might have to stop sharing. I don't know. Okay, there it is. So yeah, the next item on the agenda is adjournment. So I'm going to go ahead and adjourn today's meeting at 1:36 p.m. unless there's any other questions or comments. I really appreciate everyone's investment of time and being a part of this important committee. And have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye, everyone. Thank you.